Goblin Slayer is just a D&D game, and I'm gonna explain how the second half went down. Okay, so John, who is Goblin Slayer, and his girlfriend Lisa, who is the Priestess, arrive to play another session of their D&D campaign, run by a very experienced GM who got his original plan ruined by John's character and is now running a goblin slaying adventure. With Goblin Slayer leading the party in his anti-charismatic way, Cindy, the elf archer, Larry the dwarf, and Richard the lizard man have all gotten on board with exterminating the goblins as their main quest. However, in the latest game, Goblin Slayer got killed by goblins, and with no healing items, the players were unsure how the game would continue, but the GM hadn't told John to make a new character. They begin the game with Goblin Slayer in bed with the Priestess. He was brought back to life with a revival spell, but the ritual needed him to sleep with a virgin, the young Priestess being the most obvious candidate. Despite the GM stressing that the ritual was not sexual, the players tease John and Lisa, who are dating in real life. But once they stop, Goblin Slayer completely plays off the situation as he gets out of bed. Priestess shyly asks,
"Did you see me naked?"
"Yeah, don't worry. You don't have any of those goblin marks."
The rest of the party comes in to celebrate Goblin Slayer being alive. Then they roleplay through their decision of what to eat. Although everyone knows the GM just really didn't want Goblin Slayer to die, they are all relieved and glad he found a way out that wasn't too cheap. After the meal, they split up because John and Lisa needed to repair their armor and restock on supplies. So the GM has the second group scout, as Goblin Slayer and Priestess have a few more quick roleplay moments. They eat ice cream, and Goblin Slayer asks about how to make it. John explains that Goblin Slayer has learned a lot of his tactics from talking to people and learning about their skills. The GM, ready to mix up the enemies, tells the scouting party that there's a beholder guarding the next room that they hadn't previously explored. John, always being quick to think of clever and unique solutions, orders a bag of flour. The GM wanted to show his reoccurring NPCs again, so he had John order it from their village, and the NPCs delivered it. Since Richard got new skills that allow him to analyze the ability of enemies in his last level up, they can better strategize on how to defeat the beholder. Because they know it has a dispel ability, most of the party is practically useless against it if they fought it head on. John sends in Cindy first, who isn't too happy about it, but she had the highest dexterity and was the least likely to get hit. With her distraction, Larry uses his sleeping ability to stun it for a turn, which works against Dispel because of a rule technicality, and Goblin Slayer spreads the flower across the room. Richard sends in his Dragon-Tooth Warrior as they run back through the passageway, and Lisa casts Protection to seal them off from the enemy. The beholder wakes up and decides to shoot the Dragon-Tooth Warrior, which ignites the flower and explodes the room. Extremely happy at the teamwork and out-of-box thinking, the GM confirms the beholder is dead without any of them taking any damage. Everyone is feeling confident and happy as this session is already going much better than their previous one. As they enter into the next room, it seems to be oddly empty, except for the corpse of the beholder and a large mirror. Priestess inspects the mirror, and when she touches it, they see images of goblins on the other side. The GM explains it as some kind of portal, and this is where all the goblins in the sewer came from. As they try to figure out what to do now that they found the source of the problem, Cindy gets her perception roll and hears hordes of goblins rushing towards them. Lizard Man attempts to remove the mirror from the wall, while the rest defend against the goblins. They build a barricade before they arrive, then kill the monsters as they break through. This battle lasted a long time as Richard failed a lot of difficult strength checks, even with his special ability that increases his strength. Elf Archer ran out of arrows, so she had to resort to the Goblin's arrows that Goblin Slayer picked up for her, and Priestess, not being very helpful in killing the goblins and having no one to heal, tried helping Lizard Man get the mirror off the wall, which didn't do much because of her low strength stat. But she still tried. The horde doesn't stop, and tougher goblins arrive when Richard finally gets the last strength check to pull the mirror off the wall. Larry comes up with the idea that they cave in the roof and hide in the portal, but John instructs everyone to get under the mirror with the portal facing up, knowing there were probably even more enemies on the other side. Larry shoots the ceiling and the roof caves in, crushing the goblins, but the rubble that landed on the mirror simply went through the portal. Then Cindy realized...
Wait, we weren't under the city, were we?
Nah, we should be pretty far away from it, right, GM?
You probably should have checked before, but you're good.
See? Nowhere near the city.
Because of the long battle, the GM quickly brought the session to a close. After having them make a few strength checks, the party crawled out from under the mirror and found that none of the goblins had survived. The next session begins with Goblin Slayer confronting the Sword Maiden about lying to them. The GM explains that Goblin Slayer realized a lot of things were out of place with this quest, so he enters the courtyard and asks her if she knew more than she was letting on. John says,
Yeah, sure.
and goes along with the setup. They have an awkward conversation, the GM obviously trying to show the complex motives for the slightly shady things Sword Maiden did to hide her shame of being afraid of one of the weakest monsters when she is such a legendary adventurer, but Goblin Slayer just does not care because all he wants to do is kill goblins. John knows the GM wants to explain all these things about her, so he goes along enough to let the NPC talk. But in the end, he tells her he's the Goblin Slayer, he wants to slay goblins, and he isn't here to be her savior. However, if she ever encounters goblins again, she just needs to call him. This being the closest Goblin Slayer gets to showing compassion to someone, the Watertown story wraps up and the entire party heads back. Although they decided to destroy the valuable mirror at Goblin Slayer's insistence, the reward for the quest was a lot of gold, so everyone ended up very happy with the end results. With everyone being in a good mood after the successful mission and leveling up again, Goblin Slayer offers to make ice cream, and all the players get very excited seeing John's character wanting to do something that doesn't involve the death of goblins. The rest of the session mostly involved role-playing and world-building as the GM followed up on the side mission they'd heard about as news reached all party members that the heroes defeated the Demon Lord. The GM explains, "While many are relieved and feel safe now that the Demon Lord is dead, Goblin Slayer knows that this event has little effect on the goblins who pillage the countryside and destroy small cities. His mission is far from over." As they shop, repair armor, and similar menial tasks, the GM sets them in a restaurant with a few NPCs, Goblin Slayer's childhood friend and guild girl. They talk and have their usual roleplay moments. Everyone is very used to being their characters and having these kind of interactions at this point, but the GM adds some world building and lets Goblin Slayer hint a little more about his backstory through conversations about his sister with his childhood friend. As they continue to eat, drink, and converse, Guild Girl starts talking about various things that the GM wants the players to know about his world, and also makes mention of a training hall possibly being built next to the guild for amateur adventurers who are unprepared and die on their first mission. A not so subtle reference to their original characters in this adventure. The GM lets them roleplay and hang out for as long as they want. Once it all winds down, they fast forward to the next day, where Goblin Slayer checks around his house as he does every morning. The GM monologues once again. Although the landlord criticizes Goblin Slayer for being overly cautious when they're in a relatively safe area, Goblin Slayer is persistent. As every morning he wakes up in this house, Goblin Slayer checks the land for any signs of goblins, investigating even the most obscure spots for tracks. But unlike every other time, he has no need to check every nook and cranny of the land. The tracks of the goblins are very apparent. And the session ends. Beginning the next session, the GM asks the party if they want a recap of their adventure so far, and everyone says no. They begin the session with the GM telling John what Goblin Slayer knows about the footprints. There is a massive horde of over 100 goblins that is going to attack the farm, led by a goblin king. From the amount of scouts sent, there's no chance it is anything less. Goblin Slayer immediately tells the childhood friend to run, but she refuses because she doesn't want to lose the farm, have Goblin Slayer lose his home again, and because she knows he is going to stay back and fight the goblins. All the players think she's crazy and that's pretty weak motivation, but John realizes what the GM is trying to do, so he says okay and accepts the challenge of fighting off 100 goblins. He initially goes to the guild and starts asking everyone for help. He fails his persuasion roll, but with the help of Elf Archer's grand entrance and successful die roll, along with the rest of the party vouching for Goblin Slayer, they manage to persuade others in the guild to help. Cindy calls back to her original goal and tells Goblin Slayer they will go on a proper adventure one day, while Dwarf asks for beer, and Lizard Man wants cheese, and now ice cream. Then the guild girl runs into the room with a new quest the guild is offering, 1 gold piece per goblin kill. With that, the rest of the NPCs that the GM had been mentioning and setting up for this moment agree to fight. However, most of the players don't remember 90% of them. And finally, Priestess tells Goblin Slayer she is of course helping too. Therefore, everyone in the party stayed true to their motivations in this final massive battle. Killing goblins, fun adventures, beer, food, and finally just Goblin Slayer himself. With all the shopping and preparation done during the previous game, they fast forward to the night where the battle against the goblins is about to go down. The goblins begin their attack by sending out troops with their living victims strapped to boards that they carry as shields to defend against the archers. Dwarf Shaman uses Stupor ability, but it doesn't have a large enough area of effect, so Larry asks the GM for one of the NPCs to help him. And then other adventurers run in to rescue the hostages while the goblins are stunned for the turn. They have scouts placed around the farm to alert the party of any goblins flanking, and the GM turned it into a mini RTS game as they move the fighters around to defend the area. They had traps set up, which the GM explained as Goblin Slayer's plan from his extensive knowledge of fighting goblins. Although the GM was just using it as an excuse for the gameplay, with how John had been playing, everyone bought it. The first wave goes very easily, with the buffs from their NPC friends helping their rolls and protecting them from goblin attacks. However, the second wave, the GM amped up the difficulty, with several goblin champions joining the battle. Remembering how they killed Goblin Slayer once, Richard goes for revenge, while the rest stay at a distance and use ranged attacks. Meanwhile, Goblin Slayer and Priestess track down their leader and begin the boss fight, knowing the king will try to run when he sees his army losing. The GM's plan for this was to have Goblin Slayer fight this difficult boss until he starts to lose, which should take a while considering he has Priestess to help him. Then the rest of the party can come in after defeating the Goblin army to finish off the boss in an epic finale. Although it's a very on-rails ending, John once again managed to ruin the GM's plans. Initially, the Goblin King is very tough, but Goblin Slayer doesn't show any caution, taking the most aggressive strategy, while Priestess merely tries to stealth in the forest, which works because the Goblin King is so preoccupied with Goblin Slayer. It goes very poorly for John, except for one attack in which he purposefully gets a sword stuck in the Goblin King's chest. Immediately after, the king gets a critical attack which throws Goblin Slayer to the ground, and he nearly loses all of his HP. However, as the Goblin King approaches for the kill, Lisa asks to cast protection in front of the Goblin King as he attacks Goblin Slayer. The Goblin King's turn is taken up by this failed attack. Going back to Priestess, she then asks to cast protection behind the king to trap him. She rolls well both times. The GM says, okay, that works. He's squished.
So, there is a piece of my sword sticking out of his chest.
Oh, dang, right. Yeah, I'll roll damage. He's not dead yet, but that did do a lot of damage.
Is protection still up?
It's got a few more turns left.
I stand up and shove what's left of my sword into his goblin neck. Protection doesn't affect allies.
Yep, that works. He's dead.
Good.
John's health is very low, so Priestess uses her final spell to heal him, and they have a little sweet roleplay moment about him almost dying, even though it was a relatively minor wound. After the battle, they get their rewards and celebrate in the guild hall. Goblin Slayer gives the gold coin from the guild to the Priestess because she was really the one who killed the king. While Richard, Cindy, and Larry roleplay their characters drinking and eating together for fun, John and Lisa talk in character for what could be the last time.
Wait, is your helmet on all the time?
Yes.
So no one here has seen your face?
Except the childhood friend. Also, you slept with me when I died.
I forgot about that. Priestess wasn't looking because she was shy. Can you take your helmet off here at the end?
Sure.
John announces as he removes his helmet, which makes everyone in the party turn to him and asks what he looks like. John explains the facial features, and the entire guild runs over to look at him and comment on his face. With this, the GM ends the session in the Goblin Slaying campaign. After the session is over, everyone reflects on the adventure and praises John for totally ruining the original idea and inspiring the GM to make a really fun adventure. They reminisce about the best moments and the funniest lines each player said. At the very end, Larry jokes that maybe John had weighted dice because everyone else was new or didn't care enough about the mechanics, so the GM took care of their rolls, while John was the only one who always rolled his own dice. Thanks for watching. Part 1 will be here on the end screen if you like this. Also, this is the abridged of Ruby Ice Queendom, which I spent a lot of hours working on, so I'd appreciate it if you check it out and see if it's something you'd like. That's all for me. Jam meow.